Well, yeah. Well, hey, I was thinking about you and I was thinking about your story. And even though, we've talked a lot about it, uh, you know, that was before I got my YouTube stuff going. So I want to make sure that I memorialize, how you and I met, because of Keith.
Right.
And so let's just basically just kind of go through everything. I just want everyone to know that Beth is my friend. We've been friends for a few years now. She reached out to me through a comment on a podcast that I did for somebody else and said that she knew Keith. So I'm going to remind everybody that if you need a refresher to know who Keith is, you need to go to my Chickasaw Park encounter story because I describe who Keith is, how we met, and he was responsible for everything that happened to me at the park. But needless to say, Beth and I became friends, and she has her own little story to tell there in that area. And I think they're all interconnected, of course. And I will show map. I will actually pull up Google Map and show where her happening happened and how it's connected with a creek to where my thing happened. So, what I'd like you to tell me, Beth, is what was the year you guys were in high school? What was a typical weekend like for you guys? Because I want to get to why y'all were there, but were you like we were? Back when I was in high school, all we did was cruise the strip and
Exactly.
go to places and talk to your friends and
Exactly.
stuff like that. So you said, and I do want to get into the pre-story of why y'all were even there. So let's just go from the beginning, and you tell me what y'all were doing, why you went there, and the reason why, which is a
Okay.
good reason, and then we'll unfold the story from there.
I was just thinking today because I think I was about 15. So if that's right, it would have been 50 years ago. So say 1974, I'm assuming around 1974. My brother was driving. I know that I wasn't yet. So that would make sense. Um, my brother I don't remember when he first told me this story, but some two guys that he knew had told him a story about a little Indian Native American church out in the middle of the country between Davis, our town, and Sulphur. And he said that the friends said that somebody had told them, and I don't remember who it was or anything, but somebody had told them a story about an old monkey woman that would hang out in the trees above the cemetery behind this old Native American church, and that she would hang out in the trees. And if you went out into the cemetery, which you shouldn't be doing, I mean, it's a little disrespectful, that she would jump out of the trees and chase people off. So they'd heard the story. So they said, now I don't even remember who told him. So that doesn't help my story. But they said that they wanted to go see for themselves. And it was kind of a joke, I think, for them. I don't think it was a joke for the other guy, but I don't know. So they said they went out there and that she jumped out of the trees and chased them. So my brother was he'd heard that story and he believed them. I thought it was funny myself. I thought it was just one of those urban legends that we told because we were bored because we didn't have anything else to do.
Well,
So
it still doesn't change the fact that this cemetery is located in a patch of woods way behind the church, and if you're there at dark or at dusk or going into dark, it's a little spooky. And so,
yes,
and of course, teenagers, would thrive on
right.
spookiness if you're into that kind of stuff. And so, why not go out there at dark or after
For
dark
fun.
and tempt fate?
Right. And I didn't in any way think anything was going to happen whatsoever because I didn't believe the story, but I thought it would be fun. So my brother and some of his friends and my friends decided we were going to go. We had been at church the way I remember it. Now, I might be getting that mixed up, but I think we'd been at church that night. And the teenagers that had been at the church with us, we decided we were going to wait till after church and then we're going to all get in a car or a couple of cars and drive out there and see if we could see the monkey woman, the old monkey woman. So we all loaded up in the cars and drove it. My brother was driving, I was in the back seat. And I didn't really remember exactly what the road was until later. We kind of figured it out. But there was a road between Davis and Sulphur about midway, the way I remembered it. And we went north on that road and then ended up at this tree, this area with an old church, a little bitty, like one room church at the time. The way it looked to me, it was like it'd be one room. I don't know. It was small. It was in the middle of a bunch of trees. So we pulled into the parking lot, and there was one like street light in the parking lot, and they parked their cars up there. We all got out, and the guys that smoked cigarettes were going to smoke a cigarette before we did anything. But there was an opening between the trees back behind the church. There were trees on both sides. There was tall grass to my left of that path. And me and a girlfriend, and I won't say her name because she's deceased now, but I'm not going to say her name because she never gave me any permission. But
Did you guys already know where the cemetery was,
I didn't, but my brother knew because
okay.
the guys had told him where to go. So my girlfriend and we went on down to the opening where the path was, and we were just going to wait till they smoked their cigarettes. And so we walked down, and we were just standing there, and they're up talking and stuff. And I think we were talking, but then I heard something in the grass.
Can you explain to the people? So there was a trail, a dirt trail going through an opening in the trees, but on each side of the trail there was grass. And
yes,
how deep was that grass?
The grass was about up to my chin. So It was like Johnson grass, if you're familiar with that. It was just, they just hadn't mowed anything down in a long time. And so we're standing right there by the grass. So I'm thinking we were about 3 or 4 feet, maybe 4 feet from that grass. I don't know.
Do you know what time of day? You know what time in the evening it was?
Well, it was dark.
Okay.
And it was after church. So church would have started, say, like about 7 o'clock, probably on a Sunday night. So my guess is this is around 9:30 maybe, because I don't know how long we took before we got out there. But it was dark. And I don't remember seeing moonlight and stars and stuff. I don't really remember that. I don't remember seeing any. The only light I remember is the lamp that was the street lamp that was up there by the church in the parking lot. So there was some light coming down to where I could see some stuff where the light was on the grass or on the bottom, by my feet and everything. But I really, looking out into the grass and into the woods, it was just dark. I could see the grass, but it was dark. So she and I were standing around waiting, and I heard something rustling around in the grass. And my assumption was that if we got real quiet, and I even put my finger up to my mouth like this and said, if we'd stand there and be quiet, I figured eventually, because it was coming closer to us, I could hear it coming closer. I thought that if we'd be quiet, probably an armadillo or a raccoon was going to come wandering out, because I'd been at the lake and everything in the dark, and we'd like done camping out. And if we'd be quiet, if you heard something moving, it would come out, especially like an armadillo, because they can't see. They're pretty blind. So we just were quiet and waited, and it kept coming closer and closer, and it was rustling through the grass. And I don't remember if it feels like it was like early fall or late summer, like getting close to school time, or maybe we just started back to school. I don't really remember that for a fact, but I think there were still leaves on the trees and stuff, because it was it seemed like it was full. But something was crunching as it moved through the grass. So we stayed very quiet, and it came closer and closer. And I'm expecting any moment the small animal's going to come out. And all of a sudden, so I'm standing like facing the grass, and all of a sudden something popped up from behind that grass, and I couldn't see a face or anything. So there was no lighting on the person or the thing, whatever. There was no lighting on the face, so I can't tell you any facial features whatsoever. but I could see. And now that I think about it, there may have been some type of light of some sort. Maybe it was the moon behind the person or whatever it was, because I could see what looked like hair. It looked like somebody with long hair around their face. And I know we weren't wearing coats. So it wouldn't be like, I wouldn't expect a jacket or anything, with hair. All I saw was like, it looked like shaggy hair and I could see nothing. But as soon as he or it popped up, it took me by surprise because I wasn't expecting that. I'm looking for the small animal. And here comes this thing that's as tall as I am, possibly an inch taller or something, but not much. And I think I screamed. I know I did something. I don't know if I yelled at. Yeah, I don't know what I did. But I know that my brother and all the friends up at the cars heard me and said, "What is it? What is it?" I said, "There's," and as soon as I screamed or whatever it was I did, this person or whatever turned and just ran fast. And the place that we were at, the trees were thick. The foliage was thick. There were like vines and things. So it wasn't like you could just run through. There wasn't a path in there. He wasn't going down that path to the cemetery. He was going like a way. Cemetery would have been slightly to my right. He was going to the left and just back into the woods. As soon as I screamed, he turned and took off. My brother and the boys up the car came running down. My brother went running, and he was trying to chase it through the woods, but he didn't get very far because it was too thick. He would have chased it down too. Because
Okay, so I want to say this for the listeners. In me listening to this story, I've heard this story more than once, and so I've been able to absorb the details. But I want to share what I think I know happened according to the details with you, the viewer, and that is when Beth and her friend was waiting down there at the opening to the wood line, waiting for her brother and them to finish up their cigarette. She thought she was hearing a small animal, so she pursed her lips with her finger, told her friend to just be quiet and let's wait. So they're really not making any noise, but something is moving forward towards where its perception is they can hear the guys up there that are having their cigarettes up by the vehicle talking. So its perception may have been that it was gonna spy on whoever was up there talking around the vehicle.
right,
And it was just as surprised when it popped up and Beth and her friend was standing right there. So when
exactly.
when she in her surprise gasped or shouted briefly in her surprise and it took off running, it actually moved in the direction, and we figured this out later, in the direction of Guy Sandy Creek. Uh, so this is all going to come up later. So whenever she finishes her story, I'm going to pull up the Google Maps and we'll talk about the area. So your brother took off chasing and couldn't catch up with, and he was an athlete.
Right. He was one of the fastest guys in the whole high school. He was a running back, and there's like two positions he played where he would carry the football
So
and make
clearly,
touchdowns.
clearly he was under the impression that we were dealing with a person,
Right.
because that's why he was going after him, because he thought somebody was accosting his little sister.
And believe me, I wasn't thinking about the old monkey woman. I was thinking it was a person that was sneaking up on us too, except that it was the middle of the woods. I don't know what that person would have been doing out there.
Well,
I mean,
did you
I
guys
guess there could be people out there.
how long did you guys stay after that? Did you find any type of encampment, a
No,
sleeping area, sleeping
we
bags?
after that all settled down because he was long gone. We still decided to go on down to the cemetery. So, we were teenagers. I think as an adult, I'd say there's somebody hiding out in the woods. I'm not going out there,
Right.
but I was a teenager and they were long gone. So we went on down to the cemetery and looked around at the tombstones, and it was really old. So there were like 1800, tombstones down there. And we just looked around for a bit. And I don't really remember how long we stayed. I don't think it was very long. And then we left. So that was all that happened.
did you ever, while you're meandering around the old cemetery looking at headstones and things like that, did you happen to hear any snapping or popping of the underbrush in some other areas, like maybe you guys were still being observed?
Not that I can recall. I
Oh,
and there were a few. I would say there was probably about five of us, so I'm sure we were making enough noise on our own. You know,
yeah.
no, I don't recall anything happening after
Well,
that.
I mean, there's certainly safety in numbers, and you get enough teenagers together, and probably not too afraid of anything, especially if a couple of those guys are football players, and and your older brother and things like that. So I can imagine that the fear wasn't what it might be now with what we think we know is out in that area.
Right,
Uh, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. So you do part of this story is where you discuss this with your mom and she revealed some things to you.
right. So the next day, I told my mother what had happened. And I told her I'm sure I mean, I don't recall this part, but I'm sure I told her that we were going out there to go to see the old monkey woman, you know, and I told her what had happened. And she said, well, I think you saw Bigfoot. And I was thinking, I wasn't, back in those days, nobody had talked to me about, say, Bigfoot looking like a monkey or anything like that. So I wasn't even relating the old monkey woman with Bigfoot. I didn't even relate the old monkey woman with Bigfoot until I had talked to you about the story. And then all of a sudden I thought, I wonder if the old monkey woman was supposed to be a Bigfoot that was hanging out up in a tree in the
I mean,
cemetery.
all it took is one time for a Bigfoot to drop out of a couple of limbs and that story to snowball into, living up in the
Right.
trees, chasing people out. It
Right.
really only has to happen once for it to snowball into a crazy, witch story.
But I'd never heard that story before. My brother told me that story. So if that story was going around, it wasn't like some of the other stories that we all told each other, like the Lady of the Lake story in Sulphur, and the Woolly Booger was another story, and it's supposed to be a short, hairy creature that would chase you if you went parking out in these certain woods on the way to Wynnewood, Oklahoma, which is like 15 minutes
Yeah.
from Davis. There's supposed to be a place that if you went out and parked, a woolly booger would chase you. And I didn't even think of a woolly booger as being a possible, little Bigfoot or something, maybe.
Sounds
But
like
I,
it. Yeah.
I didn't think anything about that stuff. That just was a joke to me, too.
Well,
But
what's
that story,
interesting, you do say that your brother believed the person that told him about being chased out of there by the monkey woman.
yeah, he was scared about going out there, but he still wanted, he was just going to go. He wouldn't have gone out there by himself. I think I was always the brave one, between he and I. So I'm pretty sure I talked him into it. I don't recall doing it, but I did. I was good at that. I could talk people into doing things. So I probably was the one that said, let's go.
Well,
And
can
he
I go?
go
Can I
with
go ahead
me.
and pull up the map of that church?
Sure.
All right. So here's the church. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, everyone, if you can see my cursor, this is the way the church looks now, and it's a nice brick building. This is not what it looked like back then. Uh, so think of a lone wooden structure, single room, old timey church was what it was back then. But the grounds are still the same. You can see this is the cemetery down here, and well, no, I think this is the cemetery over here. Either way, one of these openings is the cemetery. And so the opening that she was going to come down to would be somewhere back in here. And because this is where we had a conversation with Beth about, you know, her being somewhere in here on this pathway and the high grass and whatever ran in this direction here, which would have been the guy Sandy Creek. Now,
Yeah. The direction he ran for sure.
yeah, so Guy Sandy Creek, I'm gonna pull this map out so you can see Guy Sandy Creek. And Guy Sandy Creek goes south for a few miles, meanders through all these rural areas with lots of tree cover, and then crosses the highway, and then it all merges down at Arbuckle Lake. And here is where it gets interesting. Here's Guy Sandy Creek. See my cursor over here? Guy Sandy Creek coming down in towards Arbuckle Lake. And you go over here to Rock Creek, which also goes down into Arbuckle Lake. And that's where I had my encounter. So go to my Chickasaw Park encounter, and that's where my encounter happened. And it is just a stone's throw away from where Beth had her event right here in the 70s. Now, when I started going to the Chickasaw Park, Keith told me that there were multiple groups of Bigfoot researchers researching that park. And one of the areas that they loved to go to was Guy Sandy Creek. And as you would expect, it's a sandy bottom creek. And they could find all kinds of footprints there. And I myself have found some really nice footprints there. So I would think that they've been there all along. There's no reason to think that they haven't been there all along. As a matter of fact, when I was there with Beth last year,
in March. Yeah.
yeah. So, but Keith was telling me that other, people he said they would run them across the creek so they could find their footprints. They they'd get together in groups and walk long lines towards the creek through the woods and get these things to cross the creek so they could find the prints in the creek. Needless to say, uh, how did you go to school with Keith?
Yes. I
Okay,
think I
so
think he
how
was
did
like
you,
2 years older than me, maybe. He either 1 or 2 years, and I'm thinking two in my school. Yes.
well, what do you think about him as a, was he believable?
Yes. When he told me his stories and everything. See, when I was in high school, I didn't know him that well, but I did know him. I mean, I was acquainted with him. I did. We had been to some parties at the same time, and I knew everybody in Davis. You even if you weren't close to somebody, you knew them. Because there's no way not to. The whole school, which was grade school. I'm talking about grade school, junior high, and high school was on like 300 something people total.
Well, most people know me, and I wouldn't hang out if somebody showed me that they weren't honest or truthful or have high character. I wouldn't hang out with them for very long. Uh, and I never got that from Keith at all. He was very giving with his information. He always shared. We spent a lot of campfires together in the Kiamichi Mountains. And this, my encounter was the first time I was at that park. But he filled me in on all the things that he had happen at that park, and it involved a little one. My encounter involved a little one. So there's nothing that didn't link up with what happened to me there and the fact that he set it all up for me to be there. So,
He
I
offered to take me. He said he thought it was better to even go when there weren't leaves on the trees because you could see things easier. So he said he thought the best time to go was like about February or something. And he said, if you want to come camp out, I can take you somewhere that you're probably going to hear something or see something. And I wanted to, but you got life going on and you got work and you
right.
got this and that. And it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. I met up with him on a weekend one time and went to lunch with him. And that's when he told me, because I think what had first started all this between me and Keith talking about Bigfoot stuff was that he said something on Facebook and we were friends on Facebook. And I started privately messaging him and asking him questions because I was interested. So then he started telling me things. And then we ended up meeting for lunch one day, and he told me a lot of things, which one of the things he told me was a story about a guy that he had met in the Bigfoot world. And he had told him, I know a place that you're going to have an encounter if you go. And I heard your name. He told me your name. And that's how I ended up connecting with you, is because he told me the same story I heard on Facebook. I mean, not on Facebook, but YouTube one day. I was listening to, and I don't even remember which one it was, but you were on there, and I heard you telling your story, and I knew exactly as you told your story that it was you because he told me the same exact story. So I knew where you had been. I knew what your name was. When I heard you say when they introduced you and everything, at first it didn't kick in that that's who he said, talk to me about until the story started getting told. And then I was like, oh my gosh, that's that guy. So then
Yeah, so isn't that crazy? Yeah, and I would say that we've become good friends, even though you moved so far away. Shame on you. But
well,
yeah,
hey, we've got the skunk act down here.
that's true. That's true. And I do,
So you have a connection now.
I may be getting down there in February. I've been invited, but I don't. I just, it's just such a long drive, and I do not want to fly because I got all my equipment, so I'd have to drive. So I can say that there's only about a 20% chance that I'll get down there in February where I've been invited,
Yeah,
but I may. So
it
we'll
might
see.
be worth it.
It might be. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I've got to get these things off my bucket list, and certainly Florida's one of them. So. But Beth, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I think it's a great story, and I think it's a Bigfoot. So
Well, I've come more and more to believe it probably was. You know, I always wondered, I told you this 100 times. I always wondered after my mother brought that up, I thought, I wonder if it could have been, because I told her, I said, I saw what looked like hair. She said, well, I think you saw a Bigfoot. And I told you before too that my mother, she believed in Bigfoot because her mother was raised part of the time when she was a kid down by Boggy Creek area. So my grandmother never saw anything, but I think she knew some people who said they had. So she'd heard these stories. My mom had heard the stories since she was a little kid about Bigfoot. So,
well, it's funny that you say that because on the 10th of this month, which is just a couple of weeks away, I've been invited to go down to Boggy Creek with some other
oh,
guys that are coming up from Texas and are wanting to film some stuff. And so they've invited me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. I want to, but it's just interesting. You're talking about a family member who lived down around that area, and I might be there in a couple of weeks. Isn't that crazy?
yeah.
All right. Well, tell why I
Hey,
said
why?
goodbye and
Bye-bye. He said, bye bye. Take care.
see you, buddy.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, Beth. Thank you
You're
for your
welcome.
friendship and thank you for retelling your story for me.
You're welcome.
All right, talk to you later. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I end this interview, I wanted to pull up the map one more time because I drew some specific things. The church where she had her encounter. Now, remember, this was back in the 70s. And then I showed you at the Chickasaw Park where I had my encounter in 2006. So we were out there just last year, and Beth was going over her story, showed us where it happened, and we took a trip down that creek because there's a chunk of woods down there, and you can see it. Looks like it's about 20 acres, and you know, just had an idea that possibly, a chunk of woods that far removed from houses would be a good stopping point on the creek. If these things use the creek, all the time, they'd have to have a place where they would bed down during the day. So going down that creek, which was every bit of a half a mile from the church, from the backside of that church, and there were some prints, some impressions found coming up out of the creek into that chunk of woods. And immediately within the wood line, there was a hole found with a stick sticking in the hole. And 20 or 30 feet from that was a second hole with a stick still in it. One was found by Shane, and the second hole was found by David Soliday. David Soliday was the tracker that was out with me on my last video. So you'll have to go to the video where we talked about the holes being dug at the 400. uh, I think it's conclusive that at the 400 that the holes were being dug by a juvenile because of the handprint that was found and just all of the circumstances around them and the reasons why. But you might want to reacquaint yourself with that video of the juvenile digging holes out at the 400 because there were two holes found in this chunk of woods. I think this is currently still being used. There's no reason that they would be there for this length of time and not be comfortable with the creek traveling up and down, north and south, into the park, out of the park, using the creek systems. And only naturally would they bed down in these large wooded areas that nobody really goes into. The only thing, there's some plowed farm fields right up close to these. You can see that it's just a chunk of trees with farm fields. So maybe occasionally they'll see a tractor coming in close, tilling the soil and planting crops. But other than that, these are just isolated chunks of wood that would provide cover, especially for daytime sleeping. And that's just what makes sense. And to find the foot impressions coming up out of the creek into that wood line with those holes, after all that we'd come up with at the holes at the 400, I am convinced that we need to trek into that little chunk of woods and spend a few nights in some hammocks with some of your equipment. I'll bet you they come and go into those chunks of woods. You could probably go up and down that creek and find any large chunk of land with trees that they would probably use to bed down in during the day. So we need to make some plans, folks. We need to get into some of these areas and do some investigating and do some sleeping and recording and see what's happening. All right. Thank you.